The Tudor Black Bay dive watch range is absolutely massive now, with 4 main variants all in different sizes. They all have their own different styles. They all give off different vibes. I have all of the watches with me, and so we're going to explore them all, we're going to compare them all, and if you're in the market for one, then I guess we'll try and figure out which one is the best for you. The whole Black Bay range is inspired by vintage watches, so I guess we should talk a little bit around the history of the watches. And to start off with, Tudor is a sister company to Rolex. Hans Wilsdorf, the founder of Rolex, wanted to expand Rolex's offering and offer a more affordable watch that still had the same build quality as a Rolex. And that's why early Tudors were made from Rolex parts. They just had different dials and they had different movements. They were powered by cheaper ETA movements. Over the following decades, Rolex absolutely exploded in popularity, and kind of Tudor just got a bit lost in the shadow of Rolex. And by the time it was the 90s, 2000s, they didn't really have their own individual offering. They were always doing just cheaper versions of Rolexes. That all changed in 2012 when Tudor launched the Black Bay range. Suddenly they had their own branding, they had their own identity, and although the Black Bay range is inspired by old watches, they are no longer offering watches that are just cheaper versions of Rolex. They have their own offering. Rolex doesn't do a Black Bay. Since 2012, Tudor has expanded this Black Bay range. We now have the Black Bay 54, we have the Black Bay 58, we have a new Black Bay, and then we also have the latest edition, the Black Bay 68. What all these numbers mean? They basically refer to years. For the Black Bay 54 back in 1954, that was when Tudor launched their first dive watch, the reference 7922. It had 100 meters of waterproofness. For the Black Bay 58, that refers back to, you can see a trend here, 1958, when Tudor updated that first reference of the dive watch, the 7922. They updated it to the 7924, which had 200 meters of waterproofness. The Black Bay 68 is slightly different. It's not linked to a watch, but rather a feature of the watch. In 1968, Tudor created the snowflake hand. People either love it or they hate it, or I guess some people just don't really care about it. However, it wasn't actually launched until 1969, but Tudor decided not to use the naming convention Black Bay 69 for obvious reasons. Now let's talk about the differences and what you get with each model of the watch. At a glance, you can see differences, but some of the differences are very subtle. There are, of course, size differences and color differences, styling differences, but some of the size differences don't always change in a normal pattern. And also some of the size differences might not sound it. A 2mm change in something isn't a massive difference. When you're talking about a watch, a 2mm change can be a really big difference. And just so you know, we're going to be focusing solely on the steel dive watches here. All the variants of the Black Bay range have different case sizes. For example, the 54 is 37mm wide, the Black Bay 58 is 39mm wide, the Black Bay is 41mm wide, and the Black Bay 68 is 43mm wide. Now, although those case sizes are increasing, of course, all the other dimensions are increasing, but not at the same rate, not the same ratio, and so the proportions are slightly different. For example, the Black Bay 54 is 2mm slimmer widthways than the Black Bay 58. However, lengthways, lug to lug, the Black Bay 54 is only 1mm smaller than the Black Bay 58. Again, these sound like tiny differences, but they do change the feeling of a watch. It influences how it sits on your wrist. Another measurement to note is the fact that the Black Bay 68 is 2mm larger widthways than the Black Bay. However, it's exactly the same thickness as the Black Bay. So that either means that the Black Bay is going to feel a bit more boxy because it sits taller on your wrist than the Black Bay 68, or it's going to mean that the Black Bay 68 sits more flush on your wrist because it's wider but the same thickness. So proportion-wise, it's a flatter watch. Now, I guess when it comes to sizes, you really do have to try each one of these watches on because everyone's wrist is a different size, everyone's wrist is a different shape. For reference, my wrist is 16.5 centimeters or 6.5 inches. All the movements inside these watches have all these fancy numbers, but they all kind of perform at the same level apart from 2 movements. They all have bidirectional winding, which means it doesn't matter which way the rotor is spinning, it's still going to power the watch. They all have 70 hours of power reserve, which is a large number, but it's also really useful because it means that you can take your watch off at the weekend and wear something else. By the time you put the watch on Monday morning, for example, it's still ticking. All the movements have silicon hairsprings inside, which is great for anti-magnetism, and all the movements are COSC certified. The latest updates to the Black Bay range, the Black Bay and the Black Bay 68, they are powered by METAS certified movements. So COSC certification is to do with the accuracy, and then METAS certification is to do with the robustness of the movement. If the movement goes through shock testing, can it still perform at an accurate rate? If it's blasted with a magnetic field, can it still perform at an accurate rate? And the same with temperature changes. So it proves that this movement is capable of doing the sporty stuff that it's advertised to do, but in normal everyday life, is it going to be disrupted by temperature changes or magnetic fields and dropping on the floor? It's useful to note that if any Tudor movement has a U within the caliber number, then that means it's been METAS certified. But it's also useful to note that there is no technical difference between a movement without the U, the movement that is non-METAS, versus a movement that is METAS. They have all the same functions, all the same components inside. It's just that the METAS certified movements have been METAS certified. So if you have a non-METAS certified movement, it could still pass the METAS tests. It just hasn't. I'll put a link to this spec sheet in the description down below, so if you just want to have a quick reference point, then you can check the spec sheet out on my website. You can see all the differences without having to pause this video and keep going back to it. Now let's talk about the design differences, because again, some of them are quite obvious, some of them are quite subtle, and they do influence what the watch feels like, the characteristics that it gives off. Actually, before we do that, all of these watches come on absolutely amazing bracelets. I feel like the Tudor bracelets are the best bracelets on the market, especially the clasp. The clasp that Tudor does is absolutely fantastic. However, all of these watches look absolutely fantastic on our single piece nylon straps that we sell over at barkandjack.com. With the vintage styling of these watches, I would suggest our 70-30 weave because it kind of brings out more of that vintage vibe. So check out the straps. We've got loads of colors, sizes for all of these watches over at barkandjack.com. barkandjack.com. So the Black Bay 54, it's the smallest version with all of these variants, and you'd assume that because most brands push small watches onto the female market, you'd assume that that's what this watch is offering for, but actually Tudor market this watch as a unisex model. It's based on one of the very early Submariners, the reference 5508, which was a 37mm wide watch. Although by today's standards it is a small dive watch, it's small from a style point as opposed to anything else. It's not being pushed in any particular direction. That being said, I do have to push the point that this is a small watch. It feels dainty, it feels light. So if you like to feel the weight of the watch on your wrist, this isn't gonna be the one for you. It's dainty in all aspects of the watch. It does, however, have much bigger wrist presence than the numbers suggest. One of my favorite watches is a 36mm wide Explorer, Rolex Explorer. That's on a 20mm wide bracelet, and it works because of the size of the bracelet. And that's the same thing with the Black Bay 54. 37mm wide, but it's on a 20mm wide bracelet. And so it has so much more wrist presence than you would expect from a 37mm wide watch. Now, when it comes to the looks of the watch, the Black Bay 54 was launched after the Black Bay 58. And my initial thoughts were it's lacking something, because the Black Bay 58 is just pumped full of vintage character with all the little gold touches and a little red triangle on the bezel and all the fact that the whole bezel, all the numerals and markings are in gold. The Black Bay 54 doesn't have any of that stuff. And so my immediate thought was, it's just lacking something. But I actually think that's a benefit for this watch, because from another perspective, you could see that the Black Bay 58 has too much of that vintage stuff going on, whereas the Black Bay 54 feels a bit more toned down. It's not being pushed too much into one direction or have too much fake character pumped into it. Or maybe it's got enough of that because it's so small and dainty. The Black Bay 58, although it isn't the flagship watch within this lineup, it is kind of like the famous frontman of the Black Bay 58 band. It's got all of the attention. When it was launched, it went absolutely crazy back in 2018. It became the watch to get, and it felt like everyone had this watch. That hype has died down, but that doesn't take away from it just being a good looking watch. As I mentioned, it is absolutely packed full of vintage character. It is fake because it's got these fake rivets, it's got the photina within the loom, it's got all of these little details that push the watch to be a vintage styled watch. And on one hand, I feel like it could have gone too far down that route, because how long is this vintage styling fashion trend going to last? Surely it will come to an end, and would that then render this watch no longer fashionable or no longer cool to wear anymore? There is a big plus point to the Black Bay 58, however, over the 54. Although the 54 is more toned down in the vintageness, the Black Bay 58 does have the heft behind it. It's 39mm wide, and in today's watch world, that isn't big. That's actually on the smaller end of the dive watch spectrum. And you could argue that it started, or at least was a front runner in this whole vintage-inspired dive watch trend. But it does have the heft. You do feel it on the wrist. It does have a substantial weight behind it. And so you've got the kind of the best of the both worlds. It looks like a vintage watch, but it's built to modern standards, and it has the weight of a modern watch. And size-wise, 39mm, it does sound small, certainly compared to modern dive watches, but it actually wears more like a 40mm 5-digit Rolex Submariner. And that's not a small watch, it's just not a big watch. It's a shame that the Black Bay 58, despite being an absolutely stunning watch and being this famous poster boy, it hasn't had the same technical updates as the other watches. It doesn't have the T-Fit clasp, which has a bracelet extension inside, and it doesn't have the Meta certified movements. But that leads me on to the flagship watch of this range, the Black Bay. Since the launch in 2012, it's gone through so many iterations, but this version is, in my eyes, the best Black Bay so far, both from a design point of view, but also from a performance point of view and a package point of view. We now have this 5-link bracelet, and I think it looks absolutely incredible on this 5-link bracelet. This version of the Black Bay comes with that Meta certified movement, which I mentioned. Accuracy is one thing with the COSC certification. It's fantastic, COSC certification. But it's one thing having that. It's another thing being able to prove the robustness, the build quality of the movement, and the fact it can still maintain accuracy despite all the tests and challenges that it's put through. Now, when this watch was launched, I did a video on this. I'll put a link in the description down below. Lots of people saying that it was boring, and I kind of see that. I understand it, especially when it's compared to something like the Black Bay 54, which is, it has its own little character of just being small and dainty. This is just another 41mm black dialed, black bezel dive watch. But I feel like it's all executed really well. And because of that, I can see this being the most commercial version of the Black Bay. Yes, on one hand it's boring, but on the other hand, it's versatile. You can wear this with absolutely anything, and this is more of a timeless design. It doesn't have features on it that are going to go out of fashion, like the Black Bay 58 might have. The challenge that I do have around the Black Bay is the case design. It's a thick case at 13.6mm thick, but it's also slab-sided, and it doesn't need to be, because the Black Bay 58 has the same water resistance, 200 meters, as the Black Bay range, and it has a much slimmer case to it. So the fact it's slab-sided and thick is simply just a design choice, not a necessity, and I'd like to see them just slim that down a little bit. Now for the latest addition to the Black Bay range, the Black Bay 68. When this watch came out, it confused me. I didn't understand why we needed this watch. It's a 40mm wide case, and it's not like Tudor didn't already have a large, chunky, beefy dive watch in their lineup. That's what the Black Bay does. 41mm isn't a small watch. So why do they need a 43mm watch? It doesn't have any greater water resistance, it doesn't provide any greater complication, so why does it need to have that size of a case? But then I remember Breitling, they have 44mm wide dive watches. Omega has a whole cluster of dive watches that are over 43mm. So there must be a market for this watch, this size of watch. Another thing that confused me about the offering is the fact that Tudor only offer it on their 3-link bracelet, whereas all the other offerings, you can get a choice of bracelet or strap. And they launched it with a blue dial, black bezel, or a silver dial with a black bezel. That offering isn't a commercial offering. That isn't mass market offering. Those colors and combinations are an extension. So I feel like Tudor has other plans going on, or maybe they're just testing the market, or maybe they're going to launch some crazy complication in this case size. I am just guessing though. I have fairly small wrists, I understand that, and so maybe that's why I don't understand this watch. My wrists are, as I mentioned, 16.5 centimeters or 6.5 inches. And so this 43mm wide watch, it does just sit large. It's not unrarely large on my wrists, but it is large. I wouldn't personally go for this size of watch. I guess if you have larger wrists and you feel like the Black Bay range just isn't large enough for you, then of course, this ticks the box. But then you struggle with the idea that you either go with a blue dial or a silver dial. There is no black yet. So I guess to conclude all of this, all of these watches that Tudor offers, they're technically brilliant. They're accurate, they're robust, they have decent bracelets, some of them have fantastic clasps, and design-wise, I guess that's all opinion-based. The fact is that these are high-performing watches. Yes, they cost a decent amount, but watch-to-money ratio, you're getting a lot of watch for your money with all of these offerings. I do like the fact that Tudor hasn't just got this watch design and they've increased or decreased the size of it. Each size variant has its own vibe, its own characteristics. The Black Bay 54, for example, is a true vintage diver watch in all aspects of it being vintage. The Black Bay 58, however, is a vintage-inspired modern interpretation, but built to modern standards. You then have the Black Bay range, which is your traditional dive watch, and then I guess the Black Bay 68 would be your modern dive watch. So it isn't just a size change, it's a vibe change as well. I'm too old to use vibe. For what I want personally from a watch and a watch that would sit in my collection, I feel like there's an obvious winner for me out of this whole lineup. I have owned the Black Bay 58, but I sold it because I just didn't really wear it that much. And I also wanted to make room for other stuff. But for right now, I feel the Black Bay is the clear winner for me, personally, my personal opinion. It's a more timeless design. All the aspects, all the tiny iterations that Tudor have done throughout the lifespan of the Black Bay range, I feel that's all come to this really well balanced offering that they have now. And with this Black Bay on this new 5-link bracelet with the T-Fit clasp, that is such an epic offering, and with the Meta certified movement. I feel like that's such a solid offering. I feel like this genuinely could be the one watch that does everything for you. The timeless watch that could just see you through life until you want something else, because that's what we all do. But guys, I want to know your thoughts. Which of the Black Bay range stands out as the watch for you? Or what way have you gone? Have you bought a Black Bay? What did you get? Let me know in the comments down below. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. If you like the style of this video, then hit the subscribe button down there and that little bell icon to get notifications when I drop a new video. If you're on Instagram, give me a follow at barkandjack, and don't forget to check out the watch straps and watch accessories that we sell over at barkandjack.com. I'll see you soon. Or let me know if there's other watch ranges that you want me to check out and do like just deeper dives in and comparisons. Let me know in the comments. See you soon. Take care.